Well, we're on lesson 40, part 2, and we've been discussing one of the greatest, biggest, most magnificent ghost towns of the world today. It's called Petra, in the lost city of Petra. In fact, it's so famous it's been on a lot of movies, including Indiana Jones. So it's becoming a very famous place. And as I described before, it is in Jordan. So if you look on your map and you look right across from where the Red Sea is from Israel, you'll see Jordan. And it's only a couple hours drive, and it's so hidden in such a place where whoever lived there would be protected. And it's up there in the mountains, and some of the areas are on top of the mountains, and you could see forever. And this is very important in describing the people that lived in Petra. Who were they? We already know some clues from the Bible. We know that Edom was in that area, and they were the sons and the grandsons and the great-grandsons of Esau. And they persecuted Israel. Esau's twin brother was Jacob, and they never got along. And we know what happened back then. And Esau never forgave Jacob for stealing his birthright and stealing his blessing. But we go on and we talked about it, and just a horrible thing, and how the Edomites persecuted Israel, and even today are persecuting. Persecuting means they attack Israel at any time they can. And God says that Israel is the apple of his eye. So, and the Edomites, they worshipped false gods. So what would happen? Well, we saw when I was reading from the Bible, the judgment, it said something about this people, another people that ate bread with them, that was right with them, like their friends, would take over the Edomites. It was prophesied, 500 plus years before it happened. Who would these people be that would come in and eat bread with them and take over? Could it be the Nebateans? Remember, the people said, no, Petra, they were Nebateans that lived here. And I thought, who are these people? So let's find out. Let's be investigators. So as I went on and I looked into it, there were the Nebateans. What were they? Where did they come from? They were not Edomites. In fact, they most likely came from Babylon or Persia. I always think of Nebateans and I think of Nebuchadnezzar, and so I thought probably, that might not be a real good clue, but they probably did come from Babylon, because during the time that they came through this area was right after Alexander the Great. Remember, he died in Babylon and his generals took over, and they dispersed a lot of the Babylonian people and took a lot of them slaves. Could be a time that the Nebateans had to become nomads without a country. Could be. So right, they don't know for sure, but it's a good hypothesis, isn't it? So let's go on and what I think and what we know. Well, we know the Nebateans were desert wanderers. They were nomads, and from 500 BC, they started coming into that era, but they came in more closely to the first century. So you see these guys coming through. The reason they came through is because they were going to make a living. They became businessmen. They were selling things from the Far East. They'd go into the Far East and into Egypt and Syria and Rome and Greece is where they'd sell these things. But they came from India and from China. What did they bring? They brought a lot of things. They brought camels. They brought copper, ivory, sugar, silk. They also brought slaves. But the main thing they were known as bringing was spices. Lots of spices and incense and perfumes. And that's where they started getting very rich, very wealthy. People wanted to buy those incense. They used them in their temples, but they also used them just in their homes. They loved it. They loved the smells of them. In fact, there was a wide variety of them. And as they came through, they would tell stories about where they got them. And you see some of the stories in your book. What was it? One of them was how they would have to get, let's see, what was it? Cinnamon. It was cinnamon. It would show how they could get cinnamon. So they said, well, cinnamon really came from Sri Lanka, which is in India, but they never told anybody. So they said that cinnamon was carried by the birds in huge amounts, and then they'd have to leave these bones there, so the birds would make nests of the bones, and so in some way they had to go break their nests. Pretty hard to get cinnamon that way, huh? And another one was cassia. What did they do? They say if they found it in shallow pools where there were winged beasts flying around like bats to protect them. So they had to cover their faces with cowhide and wade in the pools and fight these beasts to get the spice. They were protecting where these spices were because they wanted to bring the spices in and didn't want anyone to know where they got them so that they could become rich. I was thinking, what do you talk about spices? What would we do without our spices? Go to your mother's cupboard and you'll see a lot of spices. I see sage and turmeric. That's a good one. Cream of tartar, celery salt, paprika, ground cinnamon. We use a lot of spices. They did too. They wanted these spices that came from the East. And more than that, they wanted, isn't this cool? Because I'm going to tell you a story about this right now. And this is where I have my essential oils, as you'd say it, in this box. And as you remember, this is the manger scene with Jesus. Okay, what kind of stuff do I have here? So here's essential oil, tea tree. Oh, it smells so good. And blends of eucalyptus and blends of frankincense and myrrh, all these different things. Look I have this many essential oils. That's a lot of different kinds of oils. And then I have this. I keep it in my heart box. And in my heart box, I have the essential oils that came from, this is frankincense. Remember this name. Frankincense, very important because basically they became very wealthy on frankincense. Their main ingredient, the main oil that they would sell was this. And then of course myrrh. We have myrrh here. Myrrh was another one. Does it sound kind of familiar? Does it sound kind of like what the wise men brought to Jesus in the first century? Does to me. We're going to get back with that in just a minute. But let's go on about to these Nebateans. So they had these caravans and they traveled through. They had their own language. In fact, later on, their language developed into Arabic. So they had 22 letters and they were all consonants. And they wrote opposite from right to left instead of left to right. But they left some stories and some things in the land, but not so much because they didn't really tell why they were there or when they came there. But they came on the incense road or the spice road. The thing that was pretty just amazing is that the spice road came from the east, and as you look at Saudi Arabia, at the Arabian Peninsula, the incense road went north. And they went up and they met as they were going over towards, Greece and Rome and through Israel, that whole Syria. And they met. Do you know where these two roads met? Right about where Petra is. Maybe that's why Petra became so wealthy. As we find later on, they were. So in the incense oil, the anointing oils, and the frankincense, all of this they had to sell. But they had to have, as the caravans went through, coming from the south, from the incense road, and coming from the east, from the spice road, they'd have to have places to get water and to water their camels and to stop. And so the Nebateans would set up places so that others that came through, they could sell them, and they could be an oasis for anybody that came through. And so they started doing these, and in the midst of all of this, they realized that Petra was a good spot for oasis. It was well protected. It was way up there in the mountains and the cliffs, and they had houses and they had a city there. So they would stop in Petra, and they figured the Edomites there would treat them well. And as they stopped there, it was a perfect middleman place there, so they started settling in with the Edomites. In fact, later on we find that Herod the Great, his father was an Edomite, and his mother was a Nebatean. So we know they were close knit in there, weren't they? And as the time went on, they started not getting along at all. And sooner than later, they ended up fighting more, and then they ended up fighting more to the point where the people, the Edomites, the sons of Esau, ate bread with, that they were there living with the Nebateans took over the Edomites. And they forced them to leave. So they went south to Jordan. A lot of them went to the city of Basra and on, or some of them came into Judea. But the Nebateans, they forced them out, and they took over Petra. We know that. So here it is, getting close, close to the second and first century BC, and that's when Petra became so amazingly wealthy. Did the Nebateans build that city? Well, they used their money to build it. They went in and basically brought in the Hellenistics, the Greeks in, and the Greek builders started doing all the artwork there. And they brought in the Romans, and the Romans started building these big pillars like Colosseums. And they brought in for the arenas, a huge, it could sit 6,000 people there, almost like the Colosseum there. But could sit all these people there, and they brought in anything that would entertain anybody that was passing through. Kind of like a Las Vegas in the desert or something, I don't know. But they became very into everything, anything. They had so much money there from the sale of frankincense throughout the world that they could do anything that they wanted to do and build anything they wanted to build right in the cliffs. And the hydraulic system came through, and that's the water system. And it was so beautiful. They had pools and all kinds of things. They knew how to take the rainwater and use it. They were very good water engineers. We know all this. It was the height of Petra. Magnificent time. The Nebateans, their trade of frankincense and their trade of myrrh, and they became wealthy. We know that, remember we talked about Cleopatra and Mark Antony, we know that their sons went there. We know that the Caesars went there, and some of the tombs, no, they're not Nebatean tombs, they're tombs of Romans. So this was the hot spot place to go. This was the place that you were going to go for a resort to take, you want a vacation? Come to Petra. And that's what happened. They became very rich. But then, what happened to Petra? I mean, why is it a ghost town? Stay tuned. We have a little bit more to talk about.